Sometimes the world sees only what a man has lost, but they miss what he's still willing to fight for. In 1889, 59-year-old cowboy Silas Merrick spends his last few dollars on a rusted-out train car that nobody else wants. The whole town laughs, just a broke drifter and his donkey buying worthless scrap metal. But when Silas pries open that warped door, he finds something that changes everything. A locked chest, a diary, and secrets about a payroll robbery never solved. Now greed rolls in like a dust storm, and everyone wants what he found. But what happens when a weathered old cowboy decides some things are worth more than gold? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun hung low over Copper Falls, New Mexico territory, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. Silas Merrick stood outside the territorial land office, his calloused hand resting on the worn leather saddlebag that held everything he owned. Next to him, his donkey Rufus flicked his oversized ears at passing flies, seemingly unbothered by the fact that they were about to become the laughingstock of the entire town. 59 years showed in every line of Silas's weathered face. Deep creases bracketed his mouth, and crow's feet spread from eyes that had squinted against too many sunrises on too many lonely trails. His hands, thick-knuckled and scarred from decades of ranch work, trembled slightly as he counted out the coins, not from age, but from the weight of what he was about to do. "You sure about this, Silas?" The voice belonged to Ben Harlow, sheriff of Copper Falls for the past 12 years. He stood in the doorway of his office across the street, arms crossed over his barrel chest, concern evident in his weathered features. Ben was a few years younger than Silas, but they'd known each other since their cattle-driving days back in Texas. Silas looked up, managed a half-smile. "Been sure about less, and done it anyway. That boxcar's nothing but rust and bad memories. Railroad companies selling it for scrap weight. Then, I reckon I'm buying myself some scrap." Silas's voice carried the gravelly texture of a man who'd spent more time talking to horses and silence than to other people. A man needs a roof. Even a rusty one beats sleeping under stars when your bones ache like mine do. Ben shook his head but didn't press further. He'd learned long ago that Silas Merrick made his own decisions and lived with the consequences. It was one of the things Ben respected about him, even when those decisions made no earthly sense. The auction had been brief, almost perfunctory. The railroad representative, a thin man in a suit too fine for Copper Falls, had rattled through the items with barely concealed disdain. Most of the town had gathered, not because they wanted to buy anything, but because entertainment was scarce in a dying railroad town. And watching the mighty Atlantic and Pacific Railroad Company sell off its bones provided a certain grim satisfaction. Silas had noticed the boxcar immediately. It sat on a siding near the old depot, number 447 barely visible through layers of rust and peeling paint. The sliding door hung crooked on its track, and daylight showed through gaps in the wooden slats. Nobody else even bid. When Silas raised his hand and offered $17, nearly everything he had, the laughter started. "Merrick's finally lost his mind," someone called out. "What's he gonna do?" "Live in that thing. Him and that mangy donkey deserve each other." Silas had weathered the mockery in silence, the same way he'd weathered most things in life. He signed the papers with a careful, unpracticed hand, accepted the deed, and led Rufus toward their new acquisition that had been 2 hours ago. Now, standing beside the boxcar in the bright morning light, Silas ran his hand along the corroded metal side. The rust came off on his palm in orange-brown flakes. Up close, it looked even worse than from a distance. But it had walls, it had a door, and most importantly, it was his. Rufus nuzzled his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. Silas had found the donkey half dead in an arroyo 5 years back, abandoned by someone who'd decided he was too old and stubborn to be worth keeping. Silas knew the feeling. They'd been inseparable since, well, "Old friend," Silas said, scratching behind Rufus's ears. "Let's see what we bought ourselves." The sliding door resisted at first, rust having fused metal to metal in places. Silas wedged a pry bar into the gap and leaned his weight into it. The door shrieked in protest, a sound like a dying animal, but eventually gave way, revealing the interior. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that penetrated the gloom. The smell hit him first, old wood, rust, and something else, something musty and forgotten. As his eyes adjusted, Silas could make out the basic dimensions. The car was maybe 30 feet long and 8 feet wide. The wooden floor had gaps, and in places the planks had rotted through entirely. But it was weatherproof mostly, and it was home. He spent the rest of the morning sweeping out debris, ancient hay, rat droppings, fragments of wood and metal. Rufus stood guard outside, occasionally poking his head through the doorway to monitor progress. By noon, Silas had cleared enough space to make a rough camp. He'd need to patch the floor, shore up the walls, maybe find some canvas to cover the gaps. But that would come later. For now, he had shelter. As he worked, his mind wandered to the path that had led him here. Born in Missouri in 1830, he'd gone west at 16, full of dreams that had slowly eroded under the weight of hard reality. He'd worked cattle drives, broken horses, hired his gun a time or two when necessity demanded it. He'd married once to a woman named Catherine who deserved better than a man who couldn't settle. They'd had a son, James. Silas had left when the boy was 8, told himself it was for their own good, that they'd be better off without a drifter's uncertain life. 21 years later, he still wondered if that had been courage or cowardice. He'd last worked steady at the Double R Ranch outside Socorro, but his back had given out, and the foreman had let him go with a month's pay and handshake. That money was gone now, spent on this rusted monument to poor judgment. But at least it was something to call his own. A shadow fell across the doorway. Silas looked up to find Sarah Chen, who ran the general store on Main Street. She was somewhere in her 40s, with black hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. Her husband had died in a railroad accident 7 years back, crushed between 2 coupling cars when a brake failed. Since then, she'd run the store alone, earning a reputation for fairness and an unwillingness to extend credit to drunks. "Brought you some supplies," she said, setting down a canvas sack. "Figured you might need them." Silas straightened, wiped his hands on his worn pants. "I appreciate that, but I can't. It's on account," she interrupted. "You can pay when you're able. Everyone deserves a chance to get started, even if they're starting over." Her tone was matter-of-fact, neither pitying nor patronizing. He nodded slowly. "That's kind of you, Mrs. Chen." "Sarah," she corrected. "And kindness has nothing to do with it. This town has enough people laughing at misfortune. I figure we need more people willing to lend a hand." She glanced around the interior, her expression unreadable. "Going to need more than a broom, though." "I know it." Silas managed a rueful smile. "But I've worked with less. I don't doubt it." She paused, then added, "There's talk in town. Folks wondering why you'd buy this particular car? Some saying you know something they don't." Silas frowned. "Like what?" "Railroad company's been liquidating fast. Some think there might be something valuable left behind, hidden somewhere in the old stock." Sarah's eyes met his steadily. "I'm telling you because talk like that attracts the wrong kind of attention. Dalton brothers rode in yesterday. They're the type who listen to rumors and act on them. The Dalton brothers, Cade and Rance. Silas knew the names. Claim jumpers, thieves, and worse. They'd been run out of Arizona territory 2 years back for murdering a prospector and stealing his stake. If they'd heard rumors about hidden railroad treasure, they'd be looking. Nothing here but rust," Silas said. "But I appreciate the warning," Sarah nodded. "Be careful. Men like that don't need much excuse." She turned to leave, then paused. "If you need help fixing this place up, I know some folks who'd lend a hand. Real friends, not those who laugh at the saloon." After she left, Silas stood in the doorway watching her walk back toward town. Friends. The word felt foreign. He'd spent so long alone that the idea of community, of belonging somewhere, seemed like something from another life. Rufus brayed softly, a sound Silas had come to recognize as concern. "I know," he said, patting the donkey's flank. "This whole thing might be foolish. Probably is. But we got to start somewhere, right?" That night, as stars emerged over the New Mexico territory and a cool breeze brought relief from the day's heat, Silas lay on his bedroll inside the boxcar. He'd hung a lantern from a hook on the wall, and its flickering light played across the rusted ceiling. Outside, Rufus was tethered near a patch of dry grass, contentedly munching. Silas reached into his shirt and pulled out his father's pocket watch. It hadn't worked in 15 years, the mechanism frozen by time and neglect, but he'd kept it anyway. His father had been a good man, honest to a fault, worked himself into an early grave, trying to make a go of a small farm in Missouri. He died when Silas was 14, leaving nothing but debts, and this watch. "Tried to do right," his father had whispered on his deathbed. Wasn't always enough. Those words had haunted Silas through the years. He'd tried in his own way to live with integrity, but trying wasn't the same as succeeding. He'd abandoned his wife and son. He'd drifted from job to job, never putting down roots, never building anything lasting. And now here he was, nearly 60, sleeping in a rusted boxcar, alone, except for a donkey. He turned the watch over in his hands, feeling the weight of it. On the back his mother had engraved, "To William, who gave us everything." His father had given everything and died with nothing. Silas wondered what his own epitaph would be. What had he given? What would he leave behind? These thoughts were interrupted by a sound, faint, barely audible over the wind. Footsteps, someone walking near the boxcar. Trying to move quietly, Silas lay perfectly still, his hand moving slowly to the old Colt revolver he kept under his rolled-up coat. Through the gaps in the wall, he could see a shadow moving, circling the car. Then another shadow. 2 men at least, maybe more. After a few minutes, the footsteps retreated. But the message was clear. Someone was watching. Someone was interested in this worthless boxcar. Silas didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake, listening to every sound, his mind racing. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe buying this car had attracted attention he couldn't afford. But what was done. All he could do now was stay alert and ready. As dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Silas made a decision. He'd explore every inch of this boxcar. If there was something hidden here, something that explained the rumors, he needed to know what it was before anyone else found it. And if there was nothing, well, at least he'd have peace of mind. He stood, stretched his aching back, and stepped outside. Rufus looked up from his breakfast of dry grass, ears forward with interest. "Today," Silas told him, "we find out what we really bought," the donkey snorted, which Silas chose to interpret as agreement. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. Silas filled his battered canteen from the water barrel near the depot, noting that he'd need to refill it soon. Water was precious out here, and he'd have to work out an arrangement with the railroad or find another source. But first things first. He returned to the boxcar with a crowbar, a hammer, and the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. It was time to see what secrets, if any, lay hidden beneath the rust. The floorboards proved more rotten than Silas had initially thought. In several places, his boot went straight through the wood, revealing the iron framework beneath. He worked methodically, testing each plank, marking the ones that needed replacing. The work was slow and his back protested, but he welcomed the distraction. Physical labor had always been his answer to uncertainty. By mid-morning, he'd removed a section of particularly deteriorated boards near the rear corner of the car. The wood came up in chunks, soft as paper where moisture had penetrated over the years. Beneath it, he could see the metal undercarriage, corroded but still solid. And something else, Rufus, who'd been dozing in the shade outside, suddenly lifted his head and brayed, a sharp, insistent sound that Silas had learned to pay attention to. The donkey was rarely wrong when something wasn't right. Silas set down his crowbar and moved to the doorway. The rail yard appeared empty. Heat shimmered off the metal tracks, and dust devils danced across the open ground. But Rufus's ears remained forward, alert. "What is it, old friend?" The donkey stamped his front hoof twice, still staring toward the depot building. Silas followed his gaze but saw nothing. Still, the unease settled in his chest. He made a mental note to be more careful, more aware. He returned to his work, but now he kept his revolver within easy reach. The discovery came 20 minutes later, almost by accident. As he pried up another section of flooring, his crowbar struck something solid that rang with a metallic thud. Not the iron frame. This was different, somehow deliberate in its placement. Silas knelt, ignoring the protest from his knees, and cleared away more debris. There, wedged between two support beams and covered with years of accumulated dirt and rust, was a metal container. An iron chest, perhaps 2 feet long and a foot wide. Someone had secured it with wire to the undercarriage, hidden it deliberately. His heart began to beat faster. Maybe the rumors weren't just talk, after all. Getting the chest out took the better part of an hour. The wire had rusted into the metal, requiring careful work with pliers and the crowbar. When he finally pulled it free, Silas carried it into the light, wiping away decades of grime. The chest was solid iron, surprisingly heavy, with a lock mechanism that had long since seized. No keyhole that he could find. It was designed to be opened some other way, or perhaps never opened at all. Scratched into the metal surface, barely visible under the corrosion, were initials, TW, but that wasn't all. As he'd pulled the chest free, something else had fallen from the hiding spot. A leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it relatively dry. Silas unwrapped it carefully, his calloused fingers strangely gentle with the aged material. A diary. The leather cover was embossed with a name, Thomas Whitmore. The pages inside were yellowed, the ink faded in places, but still legible. Silas opened it to the first entry. Dated May 15th, 1869. Today marks my 10th year with the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad Company. Mr. Harrison promoted me to paymaster for the Western Division. Margaret is so proud. She says this is our chance at a real future. I pray she's right. The responsibility weighs heavy, but I will honor the trust placed in me. Silas flipped through the pages. Entries detailed routine work, payroll distributions, accounting matters, notes about rail line extensions. But about halfway through the diary, the tone changed dramatically. The handwriting became more hurried, less neat. July 3rd, 1869. Something is wrong. The accounts don't balance. Someone is taking money. Not small amounts, but thousands. I've checked and rechecked. There's no mistake. But who would dare? And how high does this go? July 10th. I confronted Harrison today. Showed him the evidence. He told me I was mistaken, that I should forget what I'd seen. His eyes were hard, threatening. I'm frightened for Margaret. These are not good men. July 17th. They killed Stevens. Made it look like an accident, but I saw the marks on his neck. He was asking the same questions I was. Tonight, I'm hiding this diary and the evidence. If something happens to me, someone must know the truth. The cash is hidden where only an honest man would look, where the iron horse drinks but never stops. The entries stopped abruptly after that. No more dated pages. Just one final note written in a shaking hand. If you're reading this, I'm likely dead. The chest contains proof of their crimes, names, amounts, evidence of murder. But it also contains the payroll from the July robbery. I never stole it. I hid it to keep it from Harrison and his men. It belongs to the workers who earned it. May God forgive me for not being braver. Tell Margaret I loved her. I'm sorry I wasn't the man she deserved. Silas sat back, the diary resting in his lap. His hands were trembling now, and not from age. Thomas Whitmore, a railroad paymaster who discovered corruption and paid for it with his life. Or had he? The note suggested he expected to die, but there was no death certificate here, no evidence of what actually happened. He looked at the locked chest with new eyes. Inside was proof of crimes, evidence of murder, and apparently a payroll from 20 years ago. Money that rightfully belonged to workers long since dead or scattered. And if Whitmore's words were true, men had killed to keep these secrets buried. The question was, what should Silas do about it? The smart move would be to leave it alone. Take the chest to the sheriff, turn over the diary, walk away. Let someone else sort out 20-year-old crimes and complicated questions of stolen money. But even as the thought formed, Silas knew he wouldn't do that. Thomas Whitmore had been an honest man, caught in a bad situation. He'd tried to do right and suffered for it. Someone should honor that. Someone should make sure his story wasn't buried forever along with that chest. Besides, Whitmore had mentioned Margaret, his wife. If she was still alive, she deserved to know what happened to her husband. She deserved to know he hadn't abandoned her or run off with stolen money. Silas stood, his decision made. He would investigate. He would find out what happened to Thomas Whitmore. And he would make sure the man's last wishes were honored, whatever that took. Rufus brayed again, more insistently this time. Silas moved to the doorway and immediately understood why. 3 men stood near the depot building, making no effort to hide their interest in the boxcar. Even from a distance, Silas recognized the type. Hard men with cold eyes, the kind who'd knife you for $1 and sleep sound that night. One of them pointed directly at Silas. Another laughed, the sound carrying across the rail yard like a threat. They knew. Somehow they already knew he'd found something. Silas's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. The men made no move to approach, just stood there watching, letting their presence serve as a warning. After a long moment, they turned and walked away. But the message was clear. They were watching, they were interested, and they wouldn't give up easily. Silas looked down at the diary in his hand, at the chest sitting in the shadows of the boxcar. He'd wanted shelter and peace. Instead, he'd bought himself a mystery wrapped in danger. But maybe that's what he'd needed all along. A reason to stand and fight instead of drifting away from one more confrontation. He carried the chest and diary deeper into the boxcar, found a loose panel in the wall, and hid them as best he could. Then he went outside to stand next to Rufus, one hand resting on the donkey's neck. "Well," he said quietly, "I reckon we just made this interesting." Rufus stamped his hoof, which Silas took as agreement. The donkey had always been smarter than most people gave him credit for. As the sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down like a physical weight, Silas began making plans. He needed to open that chest. He needed to read the entire diary more carefully. And he needed to figure out who those men were and what they knew. But most of all, he needed to decide how much he was willing to risk for the sake of a dead man's honor and a widow's peace of mind. The answer, he suspected, was everything. Because at 59 years old, with nothing to his name but a rusted boxcar and a stubborn donkey, what else did he have to lose except his self-respect? And that was the one thing he'd held on to through all the years of drifting and failure. He wasn't about to surrender it now. The chest refused to yield its secrets. Silas spent the next 2 hours trying everything he could think of, prying at the seams with his knife, hammering at the lock mechanism, even heating the metal over a small fire he'd built outside. Nothing worked. The chest had been designed to resist exactly this kind of assault, and time had only made it more stubborn. Finally, frustrated and sweating despite the evening cool, Silas gave up. He'd need proper tools, maybe a blacksmith's help. But that meant bringing someone else into this, and he wasn't ready for that yet. Not until he understood more about what he was dealing with. He spent the evening reading through the diary again, more carefully this time. Thomas Whitmore's voice came through clearly in the entries. A conscientious man, devoted to his wife, proud of his work. The earlier entries painted a picture of simple happiness, daily routines, small triumphs. But as the accounting irregularities emerged, fear crept into the words. One entry in particular caught Silas's attention. "Margaret asks why I seem troubled. I cannot tell her. She worries so easily, and I don't want to burden her until I know the truth. But I lie awake at night listening to every sound, wondering if tonight is when they come for me." Silas understood that feeling too well. He'd lain awake last night with similar thoughts. As darkness fell, he decided he needed supplies and information. The diary mentioned names: Harrison, Stevens, others. Maybe someone in town would remember them, remember what happened 20 years ago. And he needed food, water, maybe some lumber to patch the floor properly. At first light, he made his way to Sarah Chen's store. Main Street was quiet this early. Just a few ranch hands sleeping off their hangovers on the boardwalk, and old Marcus sweeping the front of the hotel. The sun was just breaking over the eastern hills, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. The general store's door chimed as Silas entered. Sarah was already at work, restocking shelves with canned goods from a recent shipment. She looked up and nodded acknowledgement. "Morning, Silas. How's your new home treating you?" "It could be worse," he said, managing a slight smile. "I've slept in worse places anyway." She studied him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You look tired." "Trouble sleeping?" "Something like that." He moved to the counter, pulled out the short list he'd written. "Need some supplies." "Nails, some canvas if you have it, coffee." Sarah took the list, glanced at it, then back at him. "Planning to stay a while then?" "Long as the money holds out." "Which won't be long at this rate." He paused, then added casually, "You ever hear stories about the railroad? Things that happened back when they were still running regular?" Her expression shifted slightly, became more guarded. "What kind of stories?" "Missing payrolls, disappearances, that sort of thing." Sarah set down the list, crossed her arms. "Why are you asking?" Silas considered how much to tell her. She'd been kind to him, had warned him about the Dalton brothers. But trust was earned slowly, and he barely knew her. "Just curious," he said. "Found some old papers in the boxcar. Made me wonder about its history." "Found papers," she repeated, her tone making it clear she didn't entirely believe him, but wouldn't push. "Silas, there are dangerous men in this town right now. Men who think you found something valuable. Whatever curiosity you've got, it might be worth keeping to yourself." The men from yesterday, Dalton brothers, Cade and Rance. They rode in 2 days ago, have been asking questions about railroad salvage. Then you buy that boxcar, and suddenly they're very interested in you. She leaned forward. "They're not just thieves, they're killers. And if they think you have something worth taking..." The door chimed again. 2 men entered, and the temperature in the store seemed to drop. Both wore trail dust and gun belts worn low and easy. The taller one had a scar running from his eye to his jaw. The shorter one, thick-shouldered and mean-eyed, smiled a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "Well," the taller one said, "if it isn't the famous Silas Merrick, man who bought himself a train car." Silas turned slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his gun. "Don't believe we've been introduced." Cade Dalton, the tall one, touched his hat brim in mock courtesy. "This here's my brother Rance. We've been admiring your purchase. Quite the investment for a man of your means." "Not much of an investment. It's just shelter. Just shelter." Rance's voice was thick, like his tongue was too big for his mouth. "That's funny, 'cause word is, you've been mighty interested in the history of that particular car. Makes a man wonder what you found in there." Sarah spoke up, her voice firm. "Gentlemen, if you're not buying anything, I'll ask you to move along. I've got work to do." Cade's eyes shifted to her, hardened. "We'll leave when we're ready, Mrs. Chen. This is a friendly conversation between men." "Doesn't sound friendly," Silas said quietly. "Sounds like you're making accusations." "Not accusations." Cade's smile widened. "Just observations. See, me and Rance, we're students of history. We know all about the old railroad scandals, the missing money, the mysteries that never got solved. And we know that sometimes old secrets turn up in the damnedest places." Silas met his gaze steadily. "If there were secrets in that boxcar, the railroad would have found them long before selling it for scrap." "Maybe." Rance moved closer, and Silas could smell whiskey on his breath. "Or maybe they just didn't look hard enough. Maybe it took a special eye to find what was hidden. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut." Sarah's hand had moved beneath the counter, no doubt to where she kept her shotgun. Silas kept his breathing steady, his body relaxed but ready. "I found rust and rot," he said. "Nothing more. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have supplies to collect and work to do." Cade studied him for a long moment, then laughed, a cold, calculating sound. "Sure, old-timer. You go on with your work. But remember, in a small town like this, nothing stays secret for long. If you did find something interesting, well, sharing's the neighborly thing to do. And if I didn't, then I guess you've got nothing to worry about." Cade tipped his hat to Sarah. "Ma'am, always a pleasure." The brothers left, their spurs jingling on the wooden floor. Through the window, Silas watched them mount their horses and ride toward the saloon. His heart was pounding, but he kept his expression neutral. Sarah let out a breath. "I warned you." "You did." Silas turned back to the counter. "About those supplies, Silas." She waited until he met her eyes. "Whatever you found, it's bringing trouble. More trouble than you can handle alone. Ben Harlow's a good man and a good sheriff. Maybe you should talk to him." He considered it. Ben was an old friend, and if anyone could be trusted, it was him. But bringing the sheriff in meant official involvement, meant questions and procedures and loss of control. And something in Whitmore's diary suggested that corruption had reached high, maybe even to the law. 20 years ago, but still. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "But for now, I just need those supplies and to be left alone." Sarah packed his order in silence, her movements efficient but worried. When she handed him the bundle, she added quietly, "My husband trusted the wrong people. They killed him for it and called it an accident. I don't want to see another good man get hurt because he thought he could handle things alone." Silas paid her what he could, promised to settle the rest soon, and headed back to the boxcar. The morning had turned hot, and sweat trickled down his back as he walked. Rufus greeted him with a soft bray, and Silas gave him the apple Sarah had included in the supplies. "We're in it now," he told the donkey. Like it or not, he spent the afternoon working on the floor, replacing the rotten boards with new lumber. Physical labor helped clear his mind, gave him space to think. The Dalton brothers knew he'd found something, or at least suspected strongly enough to make their interest clear. But how much did they actually know? And where had they heard the rumors? As evening approached and shadows lengthened across the rail yard, Silas sat in the boxcar doorway, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. His father's pocket watch lay in his palm, familiar and comforting. He thought about Thomas Whitmore, about Margaret waiting for a husband who never came home. He thought about his own wife, Catherine, his son, James, waiting for a father who'd chosen to leave. Different circumstances, maybe, but the same result. Women and children left behind, wondering. Maybe that's why this mattered so much. Maybe helping Margaret Whitmore find closure was a way to balance the scales, to do for her what he'd never done for his own family. Or maybe he was just an old fool looking for meaning in a rusted train car and a dead man's diary. Either way, he was committed now. The Dalton brothers had made that clear. There was no walking away from this, no pretending he'd found nothing. He was in, and the only way out was through. He just hoped he'd survive the journey. That night, unable to sleep, Silas lit his lantern and returned to the diary. He'd read it through twice already, but something nagged at him, a feeling that he'd missed something important. He went through it page by page, slower this time, examining not just the words, but the physical book itself. The leather binding was thick, professionally done. The pages were good quality paper, the kind that lasted, and the back cover seemed slightly thicker than the front. Silas ran his fingers along the inside of the back cover, feeling for irregularities. There, a slight gap where the leather pulled away from the board beneath it. His pulse quickened as he carefully worked his knife along the seam. The glue had dried and cracked over the years, making it easier than expected to separate the layers. Hidden between the leather and the backing board was a folded piece of paper. Silas's hands trembled as he unfolded it. The paper was heavy stock, yellowed with age. On it was a hand-drawn map, clearly the area around Copper Falls, showing the railroad lines, major landmarks, the river that ran west of town. But overlaying the map were strange markings, numbers, symbols, lines that didn't correspond to any roads or rails. At the bottom, in Whitmore's careful handwriting, where the iron horse drinks but never stops, follow the numbers home. It was a code. The map showed where the cache was hidden, but the location was disguised using some kind of cipher. Without the key to the code, the map was useless. Silas studied it until his eyes ached and the lantern oil ran low. He could identify most of the landmarks: the bridge over Copper Creek, the old mining area north of town, the water tower that had once served the steam engines. But the numbers and symbols made no sense. They seemed random, scattered across the map with no obvious pattern. He needed help. Someone who understood codes and ciphers. Someone he could trust. At dawn, he wrapped the map carefully and made his way back to town. Sarah's store didn't open until 8, so he waited on the bench outside, watching Copper Falls wake up. A freight wagon rumbled past, heading east. The banker, Mr. Patterson, emerged from his house and walked toward his office. Life went on, ordinary and predictable, while Silas sat with a secret that might get him killed. When Sarah arrived and unlocked the door, Silas followed her inside. "You're here early," she observed, setting down her basket of goods. "Need to talk. Private-like, if you have a minute." She studied his face, then nodded. "A back room." She led him behind the counter, through a doorway into her small office. It was cramped but tidy. A desk, 2 chairs, shelves lined with account books. "What's this about?" Silas pulled out the map, unfolded it on her desk. "Found this hidden in the diary I mentioned. It's coded somehow. I was hoping you might know something about ciphers." Sarah leaned over the map, her expression sharpening with interest. "Where did you say you found this?" "Inside the diary. Hidden in the binding." She was silent for a long moment, studying the markings. Then she straightened, went to her bookshelf and pulled down a thick volume. "I taught school for 6 years before I married. Back east, in a good school. We covered basic cryptography. It was considered part of a proper education." She opened the book to a section on codes and ciphers. "Let me see if I can recognize the pattern." Silas watched as she worked, her finger tracing the symbols, comparing them to examples in the book. Outside, he could hear the town coming alive. Wagons, voices, the distant sound of hammering from the blacksmith shop. "This is interesting," Sarah murmured. "These numbers here, they correspond to railroad mile markers, see? This one says 23, and that's the distance from town to the old bridge. And this symbol," she tapped a curved line, "that's used in surveying maps to indicate elevation changes. So someone would need to know the railroad system to read it?" "Exactly. It's a code designed for someone familiar with rail operations." She continued studying, making notes on a scrap of paper. "These other symbols, though, they're different. Personal markers, maybe? Or references to specific locations only the creator would know. 'Where the Iron Horse drinks but never stops,'" Silas quoted. "That's what Whitmore wrote." Sarah looked up sharply. "Whitmore? Thomas Whitmore? You know the name?" "Everyone who's been in Copper Falls long enough knows that name." She set down her pencil. "He was a railroad paymaster. Disappeared in 1869 with a payroll worth thousands. Some said he ran off. Others said he was murdered. It was the biggest scandal this territory had seen." "He didn't run off," Silas said quietly. "And he didn't steal the money. He hid it because his supervisors were corrupt, and they were going to kill him for finding out." Sarah sank into her chair. "How do you know this?" "His diary. He wrote everything down, names, amounts, evidence of what they'd done. The chest I found, he says it contains proof." "Silas," her voice was serious now, "if what you're saying is true, if there's evidence of railroad corruption from 20 years ago, there are people who would still kill to keep that buried. The Atlantic and Pacific is one of the most powerful companies in the territory. They have lawyers, politicians, judges in their pocket. I know it's dangerous. Do you?" She leaned forward. "My husband worked for that railroad. He found a safety violation, faulty brakes on the freight cars. He reported it through proper channels. 2 weeks later, those brakes failed and crushed him between 2 cars. The company called it an accident, paid me $100 and told me I should be grateful." Her voice was tight with old anger. "So yes, I understand codes and ciphers, but I also understand what happens to people who threaten the railroad's interests." Silas met her gaze. "Then help me do it right. Help me make sure the truth comes out in a way they can't cover up." She was quiet for a moment, wrestling with something. Then she returned her attention to the map. "The phrase about the Iron Horse drinking, that's the key. Where would a steam engine drink water? The water tower, but it says drinks but never stops. The trains always stopped at the tower to take on water. So it must mean somewhere else." She traced the map with her finger. "Here, Copper Creek. The rail line crosses it here on this bridge. The engines would take on water from the creek before they built the tower back in the early days, but they stopped doing that. Once the tower was built, yes. They'd stop at the tower instead. Her eyes lit up. The bridge. Where the Iron Horse drinks but never stops. A train crossing a bridge over water. The engine passes over the water source but doesn't stop to use it anymore. Silas felt excitement building. So the cash is hidden somewhere near the old bridge. That would be my guess. But look at these numbers here. She pointed to a cluster of figures near the bridge, marking on the map. 17,842. Those must indicate the specific location, maybe distance in feet or yards from the bridge abutment. Only one way to find out. Sarah looked at him seriously. This isn't just about treasure, is it? No, it's about a man who tried to do right and paid for it. It's about his widow, who might still be alive wondering what happened to him. And it's about making sure his evidence sees the light of day. Silas paused. But I understand if you don't want to be involved. You've already taken risks helping me. She stood, folded the map carefully, and handed it back to him. I'm already involved. The moment I helped you decode this, I became part of it. A sad smile crossed her face. Besides, maybe it's time someone held the railroad accountable. For Thomas Whitmore. For my husband. For all the people they've hurt. A sound from the front of the store interrupted them, the door chime, followed by heavy footsteps. Sarah's expression changed instantly. Stay here, she whispered, moving toward the doorway. Silas heard voices, Sarah's calm and professional, and another voice he recognized with a sinking feeling. Rance Dalton, just need some supplies, Mrs. Chen. Tobacco, ammunition. Rance's thick voice carried clearly. Saw old Silas heading this way earlier. He's still here. Haven't seen him today. That's strange. Could have sworn I saw him sitting on your bench at dawn. A pause. You two seem to be getting friendly. Hope he's not telling you any wild stories about hidden treasures. Mr. Dalton, did you want to make a purchase or not? Silas moved silently to the doorway, positioned where he could see without being seen. Rance stood at the counter, leaning on it in a way that was deliberately intimidating. His hand rested casually near his gun. Thing is, Rance continued, my brother and we've been doing some research. Turns out that boxcar Silas bought has quite a history. Used to belong to the paymaster's office. Last car Thomas Whitmore was seen near before he disappeared. He smiled. Interesting coincidence, don't you think? I don't think about it at all. Maybe you should. Maybe you should think about what happens to people who get between the Dalton brothers and something we want. He straightened. Give old Silas a message for me. Tell him we should talk. Work something out between us. Better than the alternative. I'll pass it along if I see him. After Rance left, Sarah returned to the back room, her face pale. They know more than we thought. They know about Whitmore and the car. But do they know about the map? Not yet. But they're watching you, following you. She glanced at the map in his hand. You need to check that bridge location soon, before they figure out where you're looking. Silas nodded slowly. Tonight, after dark, I'm coming with you, Sarah. I know the terrain better than you do, and you'll need someone watching your back. Her jaw was set in a way that told him arguing would be pointless. Besides, you said it yourself. We're in this together now. He wanted to refuse, to keep her out of danger. But she was right. He did need help, and she'd already proven herself trustworthy. All right. Tonight after midnight, meet me at the boxcar. As he left through the back door, taking a roundabout route to avoid being seen, Silas felt the weight of what he was doing settle onto his shoulders. He dragged Sarah into this. He'd put her at risk. If something happened to her, that would be on him. But there was no turning back now. The map was decoded. The location was identified. Tonight, they would find out if Thomas Whitmore's cash was real or just the desperate hope of a doomed man. And they would do it before the Dalton brothers. Figured out where to look. Silas spent the afternoon preparing for the night's expedition. He checked his revolver, cleaned it carefully, loaded fresh cartridges. He gathered rope, a lantern, tools that might be needed. And he studied the map again, memorizing the route to the bridge, the distances, the landmarks. As he worked, something caught his eye, a small irregularity in the diary's spine. He'd been so focused on the hidden map that he'd missed it before. Running his knife carefully along the stitching, he found another hiding place even smaller than the first. Inside was a gold wedding ring. Silas held it up to the light, hands trembling slightly. The band was simple, elegant, and engraved on the inside, "To Thomas, my eternal light, Margaret, 1868. The ring made it all real in a way the diary hadn't. This was a man's wedding band, carried and hidden with care. Thomas Whitmore had known he might die, had hidden his most precious possession along with his evidence. Hoping someone would find it and understand, Silas slipped the ring into his shirt pocket, feeling its weight against his chest. Whatever else happened tonight, he would make sure this ring made it back to Margaret Whitmore if she was still alive. And suddenly, finding out became urgent. He left Rufus with food and water, then made his way to the town's small newspaper office. The Copper Falls Gazette was a two-room operation, run by a thin, nervous man named Albert Finch, who survived on printing handbills and the occasional actual news. "Help you?" Finch looked up from his printing press, ink staining his fingers. "Need to look at old newspapers." From around 1869, Finch's eyebrows rose. "That's 20 years back." "Any particular reason?" "Research," Silas said simply, setting $1 on the counter. "That cover an hour of your time?" Money changed hands, and Finch led him to a back room where bound volumes of past editions gathered dust. "They're organized by year." "Good luck finding anything specific." Silas started with July 1869, when Whitmore's diary entries ended. It took 30 minutes of careful page-turning, but he found it. A small article on page 3. Railroad paymaster missing Thomas Whitmore. Paymaster for the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad Western Division has not been seen since July 18th. Company officials report that Whitmore failed to arrive for work and cannot be located at his home. His wife, Margaret Whitmore, has appealed for information regarding his whereabouts. Railroad authorities suggest Whitmore may have absconded with company funds, though Mrs. Whitmore vehemently denies this possibility. Anyone with information should contact Sheriff Clayton Hayes. The article was brief, clinical, and Silas could read the bias in it. The railroad had already begun shaping the narrative. Whitmore was a thief who'd run off. His widow's protests were mentioned but dismissed. He searched through subsequent editions. More articles appeared over the following weeks, each one more damning. Evidence suggests payroll theft. Whitmore's accounts show irregularities. Railroad offers reward for information. And finally, 2 months later, Whitmore case closed. Authorities conclude missing paymaster fled with stolen funds. Case officially suspended, but nowhere did it mention Margaret's final fate. Had she stayed in Copper Falls? Moved away? Was she even still alive? Silas returned to the main office. "Finch, you got any directory or census records?" "Looking for someone who might have lived here in 69. Territory didn't do regular census back then, but I might have something." Finch rummaged through files, produced a leather-bound book. Church directory from the Methodist congregation. They kept records of members, births, deaths, marriages. More reliable than anything official. Silas paged through carefully. They're Whitmore, Thomas, and Margaret. Married 1868. Address listed as Railroad Avenue. But a note had been added in different ink. Relocated to Santa Fe, 1870, Santa Fe. She'd left Copper Falls after her husband's disappearance, probably fleeing the scandal and suspicion. But had she stayed there? Was she still alive? "This help?" Finch asked. "More than you know." Silas closed the book. "One more thing. Sheriff Hayes, the one mentioned in the articles. What happened to him?" "Long dead. Died in office 1872. Heart gave out, they said." Finch's expression was carefully neutral. "Ben Harlow took over after." Silas filed that information away. Sheriff Hayes had closed the case quickly, too quickly. Had he been part of the cover-up? Or just incompetent? He returned to the boxcar as the sun was setting, mind racing. Margaret Whitmore was alive, or at least had been as recently as the church directory was updated. Santa Fe wasn't far, 2 days' ride, maybe 3. If they found the cash tonight, if it contained what Whitmore claimed, then Silas would have proof to bring to her. Proof that her husband hadn't abandoned her, hadn't stolen anything, had died trying to do the right thing. But first, they had to survive the night. Ben Harlow showed up just after dark. His presence unexpected but not unwelcome. The sheriff dismounted, tied his horse, and approached the boxcar where Silas sat in the doorway. "Ben, what brings you out here?" "Need to talk." Harlow settled beside him, groaning slightly as his knees complained. "Been hearing things. Dalton brothers asking questions about you? About the railroad? About old disappearances?" Silas considered how much to tell him. Ben was a good man, but he was also the law, bound by procedures and politics. "They think I found something in this boxcar. Did you?" "Found history. Found a story that should have been told 20 years ago." Harlow was quiet for a moment. "This about Thomas Whitmore?" The question surprised Silas. "You know about him?" "Know the name." "Know the case? Was my predecessor's biggest failure, or biggest cover-up, depending on who you believe." Harlow pulled out a tobacco pouch, began rolling a cigarette. "My father was deputy back then. Clayton Hayes' second. He used to talk about it late at night when he'd been drinking. Said the case stunk from the beginning. Said Hayes got orders from higher up to close it quick and quiet." "Who gave the orders?" "Railroad executives, politicians, people with power and money who wanted a thief instead of a scandal." He lit the cigarette, inhaled. "My father tried to investigate properly. Started asking questions, following leads. Then he had an accident. Fell down the courthouse stairs, broke his neck. 2 weeks before he was set to retire, Silas absorbed this." "You think it wasn't an accident?" "I think my father was murdered because he got too close to the truth." Harlow's voice was flat, emotionless, but his jaw was tight. "I think Sheriff Hayes was either paid off or threatened into closing the case. And I think if you found evidence related to that case, you're in serious danger. Sarah already warned me. Sarah Chen's a smart woman. You should listen to her." Harlow turned to face him. "What did you find, Silas? And don't tell me it's nothing." "I've been a lawman too long to buy that." Silas made his decision. He trusted Ben Harlow, trusted him more than he'd trusted anyone in years. "Found Whitmore's diary, found a map, and found this." He pulled out the wedding ring, held it up in the lamplight. Harlow stared at it. His wedding band, engraved by his wife. He hid it along with evidence of railroad corruption, embezzlement, murder, fraud. "Tonight I'm going to find where he hid the rest of it." "Tonight?" Harlow's voice sharpened. "Alone?" "Sarah's coming with me." She helped decode the map. "Damn it, Silas." Harlow stood, paced. "You're both going to get killed. The Daltons are watching you. They probably followed you today. If you head out to wherever this cash is hidden, they'll be right behind you. Then come with us." "Even the odds." Harlow stopped pacing, studied Silas's face. "You're serious about this?" "My whole life, I've been running from commitment, from standing up when it mattered. Let my wife and son down. Drifted from job to job, never built anything lasting." Silas stood, faced the sheriff. "This is my chance to do something that matters. To help a widow learn the truth about her husband. To expose corruption that cost good people their lives, including your father. I'm not running from this." Harlow was silent for a long moment. Then he dropped his cigarette, ground it out with his boot heel. "Where's the cache supposed to be?" "Old bridge over Copper Creek, where the rail line crosses. That's rough territory at night. Canyon walls, loose rock. If the Daltons follow us there, it'll turn into a shooting gallery." "I know. And you're going anyway." "Yes." Harlow shook his head, but there was a hint of a smile. "You always were stubborn. Even back in Texas, you'd make up your mind and nothing could change it." He moved to his horse, checked his rifle. "All right, I'm in. But we do this smart. We go armed, we watch each other's backs, and at the first sign of serious trouble, we get the hell out. Evidence isn't worth dying for." "Agreed. And after this, if we find what we're looking for, you let me handle it proper. No lone cowboy justice, no taking matters into your own hands. We bring the evidence to the federal marshal in Santa Fe, let them deal with it. That was always the plan." Sarah arrived just after midnight, dressed in practical clothes and carrying a rifle. She looked surprised to see Ben Harlow, but not displeased. "Sheriff." "Sarah, glad you talked sense into this stubborn old fool." I did no such thing. Just decided if he was going to be foolish, someone should be there to help. She turned to Silas. Ready? He nodded, feeling the weight of the wedding ring in his pocket, the weight of history and responsibility. Let's go find Thomas Whitmore's truth. They rode out in silence, 3 horses moving through moonlit darkness toward the old bridge. Silas led on his borrowed mount. Ben had insisted he not attempt the rough terrain on foot. Sarah rode beside him, confident and alert. Ben brought up the rear, his eyes constantly scanning for followers. The trail followed the old rail line for a time, then diverged toward the canyon where Copper Creek cut through the landscape. The night was cool, stars brilliant overhead, and Silas found himself thinking about the last time he'd been part of something larger than himself. It had been years, maybe that cattle drive in '74, or the time he'd helped defend a ranch against rustlers back in his 30s. Being alone had been easier, safer. No one to disappoint, no one to let down. But it had also been empty. You're thinking loud, Sarah said quietly. I can practically hear it. Silas glanced at her. In the moonlight, her face was serious but not afraid. Just wondering if I'm doing the right thing, dragging you both into this. Nobody dragged me anywhere. I made my own choice. Same here, Ben added from behind. And for what it's worth, this is the most alive I've felt in years. Being sheriff in Copper Falls is mostly breaking up saloon fights and tracking down lost cattle. This matters. They reached the canyon rim just before 1 in the morning. Below, the rail bridge stretched across the gorge, a dark skeleton of iron and wood. The creek ran 30 feet below, its sound carrying up through the still air. There, Silas pointed to the northern abutment. Map shows the cache somewhere near the support structure. They picketed the horses on the rim and descended carefully. The canyon wall was steep, loose with shale and gravel. Sarah slipped once, and Silas caught her arm, steadying her. They shared a brief look, gratitude, connection, something more, before continuing down. At the base of the bridge, the terrain leveled somewhat. The creek ran cold and clear, and the bridge supports loomed overhead. Massive iron pillars sunk deep into concrete footings. According to the map, they needed to go 17 paces north from the northern abutment, then 8 paces west, then 42 paces along the canyon wall. Ben kept watch while Silas and Sarah paced out the distances. The numbers led them to a section of canyon wall that looked no different from any other, just rock and scrub brush and shadow. This can't be right, Sarah said, running her hand over the stone. There's nothing here. Wait, Silas studied the rock face more carefully. There, a slight discoloration, a difference in texture. He pulled away some brush and found a gap, narrow but deep, barely visible in the darkness. Here, behind this, they worked together to clear the entrance. It was a natural crevice in the rock, widened slightly by human hands, just large enough for a man to squeeze through. Beyond, darkness. I'm going in, Silas said, lighting his lantern. Not alone, you're not. Ben moved up beside him. Sarah, you keep watch out here. Anyone comes, you fire 1 shot. We'll hear it and know to get out fast. Sarah nodded, checking her rifle. Be careful. The crevice opened into a small cave, no more than 10 feet deep. The air inside was cool and dry, untouched for decades. And there, against the back wall, covered with a canvas tarp, stiff with age, was a wooden crate. Silas's heart pounded as he pulled away the tarp. The crate was about 3 feet square, constructed of solid oak and surprisingly well preserved. Burned into the wood was a mark, A&P Railroad Company, Payroll Division. This is it, Ben breathed. This is actually it. They pried open the crate carefully. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were bundles of paper currency and several heavy bags that clinked with the sound of coins. But more importantly, there was a leather portfolio thick with documents. Silas opened it with shaking hands. The first document was a ledger, filled with columns of numbers and names in neat handwriting. Page after page of evidence, payments to officials, bribes, embezzled funds. And attached to many entries were supporting documents, receipts, letters, testimonials. My God, Ben whispered. This is everything. Names, dates, amounts. If this is authentic, it implicates dozens of people, railroad executives, territorial officials, even a federal judge. It's authentic, Silas pointed to entries dated July 1869. These match exactly what Whitmore wrote in his diary. He documented everything before he hid it. At the bottom of the portfolio was a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To my beloved Margaret." Silas set it aside reverently. That was private, meant for Whitmore's widow alone. He wouldn't open it. "We need to move this out of here," Ben said. "Get it somewhere secure before—" A gunshot cracked through the night, Sarah's warning. They extinguished the lantern immediately, plunging into darkness. Silas's hand found his revolver as his eyes struggled to adjust. Ben was beside him, rifle ready. "Stay low," Ben whispered. "Follow me out." They emerged from the crevice to find Sarah crouched behind a boulder, her rifle aimed up canyon. "3 men," she called softly. "Maybe 4. "Coming down the trail." "Daltons," Silas said grimly. "Has to be." "They followed us." Ben moved to a defensive position. "Sarah, get behind me. Silas, cover the left flank. We're trapped down here," Sarah pointed out. "They have the high ground." She was right. The canyon walls rose steeply on both sides, and the bridge offered little cover. Whoever was coming would have clear shots at them. "The cave," Silas said. "We can defend from there. Narrow entrance, they can only come at us one at a time. They'll just wait us out. We have no water, no food. Then we negotiate." Ben's voice was calm, measured.
"We're the law."
"They're wanted criminals. Maybe they'll see reason." A voice echoed down from the canyon rim. Cade Dalton's, unmistakable, even distorted by distance. "Sheriff Harlow." "Silas Merrick, we know you're down there, and we know what you found. Be smart about this. Just leave the money and walk away." Ben called back. "This is a legal investigation, Dalton. You're interfering with the law. Leave now and I won't press charges." Cade's laughter was cold. "You're not in a position to make threats, Sheriff. You're in a hole with nowhere to go. We can wait all night if we have to. Or we can come down there and take what we want by force. Your choice." Silas looked at Sarah, at Ben, at the cave entrance behind them. They were outgunned and trapped, but they had the evidence, and that was what mattered. If they could just hold out until dawn, maybe someone would notice their absence. Maybe help would come, or maybe this was where it ended. Ben seemed to read his thoughts. "I'm not giving up that evidence. Too many people died to keep it hidden. My father died for it. My husband too," Sarah added quietly. Silas touched the wedding ring in his pocket. "Thomas Whitmore had died for it as well. Died trying to do the right thing. And Margaret was still out there, still wondering, still grieving. We hold," he said. "We make them come to us, and we hold as long as we can." A bullet spanged off rock near Sarah's position, the shot echoing through the canyon. The negotiation was over. The Daltons were coming. They retreated to the cave entrance, using the crate and rocks to build a makeshift barricade. The entrance was narrow enough that attackers would have to come single file, eliminating their numbers' advantage. But it also meant there was no way out if things went bad. "When my son was 8, Silas said suddenly, "I taught him to ride. He was scared at first, didn't want to fall. I told him falling was part of learning, that what mattered was getting back up." He checked his revolver, made sure every chamber was loaded. "Then I left, ran away from my own advice. Spent 20 years falling and never getting back up." Sarah touched his arm. "You're up now." "We all are," Ben agreed. "And we're going to stay up, together." More shots rang out, closer now. The Daltons and their men were descending into the canyon, using the darkness and superior numbers to their advantage. Silas could see muzzle flashes, count at least 4 distinct positions. "Here they come," Ben said, raising his rifle. "Remember, we're not trying to kill anyone. Just hold them off until help arrives or daylight comes. And if help doesn't come," Sarah asked, "then we fight until we can't anymore. But we don't give up that evidence, no matter what." The first attacker appeared at the cave entrance, not one of the Daltons, but a hired gun, probably promised a share of the money. Ben fired intentionally high, and the man ducked back with a curse. "Last chance," Cade shouted. "Throw out the money and you walk away alive." Silas thought about all the years he'd walked away from fights that mattered, all the times he'd chosen safety over principle, comfort over commitment. He thought about his father dying with nothing, About Thomas Whitmore hiding evidence that could bring down corrupt men. About Ben's father murdered on courthouse stairs. About Sarah's husband crushed between train cars. Too many people had paid the price for other men's greed and cowardice. "No," Silas shouted back. "You want it? Come and take it." The assault began in earnest. Bullets sparked off rock, whined through the narrow entrance. Silas fired carefully, conserving ammunition, aiming to wound rather than kill. Beside him, Sarah and Ben did the same. 3 people against at least 4, but protected by stone and determination. Time became strange, measured not in minutes, but in breaths, in gunshots, in moments of terror and clarity. Silas's hands were steady despite his age. His aim was true, and for the first time in decades, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he should do. Whatever happened now, he would face it standing up. The gunfight stretched into an hour, then longer. The Daltons were patient, probing the defenses, testing for weaknesses. They had time on their side, and they knew it. But they'd also learned that the 3 people in the cave weren't going to surrender easily. During a lull in the shooting, Silas took the opportunity to examine the portfolio more carefully. Ben kept watch at the entrance while Sarah reloaded her rifle, and Silas spread the documents out on the cave floor, using his dimmed lantern to read. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Thomas Whitmore had been meticulous, documenting every instance of fraud he'd discovered. Railroad executives had been skimming from construction budgets, bribing officials to approve shoddy work and pocketing the difference. When workers died due to faulty equipment or unsafe conditions, the company paid off local sheriffs to rule the deaths accidental. But one document caught Silas's attention. It was different from the others, written in a different hand, on different paper. The date at the top made his blood run cold. March 14th, 1875. 6 years after Thomas Whitmore had supposedly disappeared. Silas's hands trembled as he read. "To whoever finds this, I pray you are an honest soul. My name is Thomas Whitmore. If you are reading this, I am likely dead now, truly dead, not merely hiding as I have been these past 6 years. I did not steal the payroll. I did not run away. I witnessed murder. On the night of July 17th, 1869, I worked late at the railroad office, finalizing the accounts I had uncovered. I heard voices in the next room, Mr. Harrison and 2 others. They were discussing my supervisor, Edward Stevens, who had been asking questions about the missing funds. Harrison said Stevens had to be dealt with before he went to federal authorities. I hid and listened as they planned his murder. The next morning, Stevens was found dead, his neck broken. They claimed he fell from a loading platform. I knew the truth. I fled that night with the evidence and the payroll, not to steal it, but to keep it from their hands. I knew they would kill me next. I staged my disappearance, made it look like I'd run off with the money, hoping they would stop looking for me if they believed I was a common thief. For 6 years, I've lived in hiding, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long. I have watched from afar as my beloved Margaret suffered the shame of being called a thief's wife. It has nearly destroyed me to see her pain and be unable to comfort her, but I stayed hidden because I had no proof that would stand against their influence. They owned the sheriff, the judges, the newspapers. Coming forward would have meant my death and accomplished nothing. I have hidden the evidence and the payroll where it will one day be found. I've documented everything in my original diary, which I have concealed in the last place anyone would look, in the boxcar where I made my final preparations before fleeing. If you have found this letter, you have found the cash. Inside the envelope marked for Margaret are letters I have written to her over these years. Letters I could never send, but letters that show my love never wavered. Please see that she receives them. Please tell her I never stopped loving her. The money in this cash belongs to the railroad workers it was meant to pay. Some of those men are surely dead now, but their families should receive what was owed. The evidence must be given to federal authorities. Only they have the power to prosecute crimes this large and this far-reaching. As for me, I am dying. The consumption has taken hold, and I have only months, perhaps weeks left. I've lived these final years in solitude and regret, but with the knowledge that I did not betray my principles or my wife. I hope that brings her some comfort. Thomas Whitmore, March 1875, somewhere in Arizona Territory. Silas sat back, stunned. Thomas Whitmore hadn't died in 1869. He'd lived for 6 more years, hiding, watching his wife suffer, carrying the weight of his secret alone. And then the consumption, tuberculosis, had killed him somewhere in Arizona, probably buried in an unmarked grave. His name forever associated with theft and betrayal. Silas? Sarah had noticed his expression. "What is it?" He handed her the letter wordlessly. She read it, her eyes widening, then passed it to Ben. "My God," the sheriff breathed. He was alive all those years, watching his wife grieve, unable to go to her. "He witnessed murder," Silas said quietly. "Saw them plan to kill his supervisor. That's why he ran, not because of the money, but because he'd be next." Sarah's eyes were wet. "And Margaret never knew. She spent all those years thinking he'd abandoned her, stolen from his employers, betrayed everything they'd built together. She deserves to know the truth," Silas said. "Deserves to read these letters he wrote her." Ben nodded slowly. "This changes everything. This isn't just evidence of financial crimes. This is a murder confession. Harrison ordering Stevens killed. And if Whitmore witnessed it, if he documented it, then there's no statute of limitations. Murder never expires. Harrison's probably dead by now," Sarah pointed out. "It's been 20 years, maybe, but his co-conspirators might not be. And the railroad company itself can still be held accountable." Ben looked at the documents spread before them. "If we get this evidence to the right people..." Another volley of gunfire interrupted him. Bullets ricocheted off the cave walls, and they scrambled back to defensive positions. "Getting bolder," Ben muttered, returning fire. "They must be running low on patience." Cade's voice echoed from outside. "We know you can't have much ammunition left. Throw out the money, and we'll let you live." "They're lying," Sarah said flatly. "They'll kill us the moment they have what they want. We're witnesses." She was right. The Daltons couldn't afford to leave witnesses who could testify to murder and robbery. Their only chance of survival was to hold out or to escape. "There might be another way out," Silas said suddenly, studying the cave walls. "Look here, the rock formation. This is limestone, easily eroded by water. There might be passages deeper in." Ben brought the lantern closer. At the back of the cave, partially hidden by shadows, was a crack in the rock that looked like it might lead somewhere. "Worth checking," Ben agreed. "Sarah, keep them occupied. Silas and I will see if this goes anywhere." The crack was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Silas went first, the lantern held before him, his body scraping against rough stone. Behind him, he could hear Ben's labored breathing. The passage widened after about 20 feet, opening into a small chamber. And there, carved into the rock, were markings, old native petroglyphs, and beneath them fresher scratches in English, TW 1869. "Whitmore was here," Silas said. "This is where he hid before he moved the cache to its final location." The chamber had another exit, a natural chimney that led upward. Looking up, Silas could see a faint grey light, not moonlight, but the pre-dawn glow. The tunnel led to the surface, probably emerging somewhere on the canyon rim, away from the Daltons' position. "We can get out," Ben said. "We can escape with the evidence, but that would mean leaving the money behind." And while the money wasn't theirs to take, abandoning it to the Daltons felt wrong. It belonged to the families of workers long dead, just as Whitmore had written. "You two go," Silas said. "Take the portfolio and the letter. Get them to the federal marshal in Santa Fe. I'll stay here, hold them off as long as I can." "That's suicide," Sarah said sharply. She joined them, having heard the plan. "You won't last an hour alone." "Then we all go," Ben decided. "We can come back for the money with reinforcements. The evidence is what matters most," Silas wanted to argue, but he knew Ben was right. Thomas Whitmore had sacrificed 6 years of his life to protect this evidence. Dying to save money wouldn't honor that sacrifice. Getting the truth out would. "All right," he agreed. "But we take the envelope for Margaret, too. And this." He picked up Thomas Whitmore's wedding ring from where he'd set it with the documents. "She should have this back." They worked quickly, gathering the most crucial documents into Ben's saddlebag. The portfolio, the letter, the evidence of murder and fraud. The envelope for Margaret, sealed with wax that had somehow survived 2 decades. And the wedding ring, gold gleaming in the lantern light. As dawn broke over the canyon and the Daltons prepared for their final assault, 3 people climbed through an ancient passage in the rock, carrying the truth that powerful men had killed to hide. Behind them, the money remained in the cave, for now. But Silas had a feeling they'd be back for it, this time with federal marshals and proper authority. Thomas Whitmore's secret was finally coming to light, 20 years after he'd hidden it. And his widow would finally learn that her husband had been a hero, not a thief. Whatever happened next, that truth was worth everything. They emerged from the passage about a quarter mile from where the Daltons waited, their horses still tied where they'd left them. The eastern sky was painting itself in shades of pink and gold, and the morning air was cool and sweet. For a moment, standing there on the canyon rim with the evidence safe, Silas felt something close to triumph. Then gunshots rang out from below. The Daltons had discovered their escape. Move. Ben grabbed the reins of his horse, hauling himself into the saddle. Sarah was already mounted, and Silas scrambled onto his borrowed horse as bullets began kicking up dust around them. They rode hard for town, the horses laboring up the trail from the canyon. Behind them, angry shouts and the sound of pursuit. The Daltons were coming, and they were done being patient. "We need to get to the telegraph office," Ben called over the thunder of hooves. "Send word to Santa Fe. Get federal marshals here before the Daltons can regroup." But as they crested a ridge and Copper Falls came into view, they saw smoke rising from the direction of the town. Not the usual chimney smoke of morning cooking fires. This was thick and black, the smoke of buildings burning. "Oh no," Sarah breathed. They rode into chaos. The Daltons had sent men ahead, probably while they were trapped in the canyon. The telegraph office was burning, the operator's small house beside it engulfed in flames. Several other buildings showed damage. Broken windows, kicked-in doors. Ben pulled up short in front of his office. The door hung open, the interior ransacked. But more importantly, Deputy Morrison lay on the ground outside, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. "Ben!" he gasped as the sheriff knelt beside him. 5 men came about an hour ago. Burned the telegraph, said if anyone tried to help, they'd burn the whole town. "They're waiting at the saloon. You're going to be fine," Ben said, though his face was grim. He looked up at Sarah. "Get Doc Henderson, and stay with Morrison. That wound needs tending." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between helping and staying with the fight. But she was practical above all else. "Be careful," she said to both men, then rode off toward the doctor's house. Ben and Silas took stock of the situation. 5 men at the saloon, probably armed and waiting for them. The Dalton brothers and their remaining men would arrive soon from the canyon. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with the town held hostage. "We could run," Ben said quietly. "Take the evidence, ride for Santa Fe ourselves, and leave the town to burn." "Leave people to die?" Silas shook his head. "That's not the law's way. And it's not my way anymore," Ben managed a grim smile. "Didn't think so. Just wanted to give you the option." He checked his rifle, his revolver. "We need a plan that doesn't get everyone killed." Silas thought about it, his mind working through possibilities. 5 men at the saloon. Citizens of Copper Falls scared and hiding in their homes. And somewhere, the Dalton brothers racing back to town, probably bringing more men with them. "We split up," he said. "You go in the front of the saloon, badge visible, official-like. Demand they surrender. While they're focused on you, I come in through the back. We catch them between us. That's barely a plan. You have a better one." Ben didn't. "All right. Give me 5 minutes to get into position. And Silas, try not to get killed. Sarah would never forgive me." As Ben headed toward the saloon, Silas made his way around through the back alleys. He passed frightened faces in windows, people who'd lived in Copper Falls for years, watching their town being torn apart by violence and greed. This was what corruption led to, not just stolen money or fraudulent accounts, but real harm to real people. Thomas Whitmore had understood that. He'd seen men killed, families destroyed, and he'd sacrificed everything to preserve evidence that might someday stop it. Silas reached the back door of the saloon just as Ben's voice rang out from the front. "This is Sheriff Ben Harlow. You men are under arrest for arson, assault, and attempted murder." "Come out with your hands up!" Laughter answered him. Then a voice Silas didn't recognize. "Sheriff, you come in here, you're a dead man. We got orders to hold this place until the Dalton brothers arrive. Nobody leaves, nobody enters. Those orders come from murderers and thieves. Surrender now, and you might live to see trial. We'll take our chances with the Daltons." Silas eased open the back door, moving into the darkened storage room. He could hear voices from the main room, 5 distinct voices, just as Morrison had said. Through a crack in the door, he could see their positions: 2 by the windows covering the street, 2 near the bar, 1 by the front door. Ben was still talking, keeping them distracted. "You men know who Thomas Whitmore was? Railroad paymaster who supposedly stole money 20 years back. Don't care about ancient history, Sheriff. You should. Because he didn't steal anything. He witnessed murder, and he hid evidence that's going to bring down everyone involved. Evidence we now have. You keep working for the Daltons, you're going to hang right alongside them." That got their attention. Silas could see the men exchanging glances, uncertainty creeping in. Hired guns were brave when the odds were in their favor, but the prospect of hanging changed calculations quickly. "You're bluffing," one of them said, but his voice held doubt. "No bluff. We have Whitmore's diary, his evidence portfolio, testimony of murder. Federal marshals are probably already on their way from Santa Fe. Every man who sides with the Daltons now is going to face a rope." More uncertain glances. Silas saw his opportunity and took it. He pushed through the door, his revolver leveled. "He's telling the truth. Now put your guns down before someone gets hurt." The man nearest him spun, raising his rifle. Silas fired first, aiming for the shoulder. The man went down with a cry. The others scrambled for cover, but Ben had already pushed through the front door, his own rifle ready. "Last chance!" Ben roared. "Drop your weapons or die!" For a long moment everything hung in balance. Then one of the hired guns threw down his pistol. "I ain't dying for the Daltons," he said. "They don't pay enough for a noose." The others followed suit, weapons clattering to the floor. Ben moved quickly, gathering the guns, while Silas kept his revolver trained on the men. "Smart choice," Ben said. "Now sit down, hands on your heads. You move wrong, and my friend here will put a bullet in you." They were securing the prisoners when hoofbeats thundered outside. Through the window, Silas could see the Dalton brothers and 3 more men riding up fast. Cade's face was twisted with rage. "They're here," Silas said quietly. Ben positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. "This is it then. Last stand. Not alone." Sarah's voice came from behind them. She entered through the back, her rifle reloaded, Doc Henderson right behind her carrying his medical bag and, surprisingly, a shotgun. "Towns had enough of bullies," Henderson said. His hands were steady despite his 70 years. Time someone stood up. More townspeople were gathering. Marcus from the hotel with his hunting rifle, Albert Finch from the newspaper office, even Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, carrying her late husband's pistol. They weren't an army, but they were neighbors who decided that enough was enough. Cade Dalton dismounted, his hand hovering near his gun. "Sheriff, I know you're in there. Send out Silas Merrick and that evidence, or we burn this whole town to the ground." Ben stepped out onto the boardwalk, badge glinting in the morning sun. Behind him, the townspeople formed a line, armed and resolute. "You're not burning anything, Dalton. And you're not getting the evidence. It's already on its way to federal authorities. This is over. Nothing's over." Cade's voice was ragged with fury. "That money's mine. That evidence, it can't be allowed to surface." "Why?" Silas stepped out beside Ben. "Why does it matter so much to you?" "Because my father's name is in those documents." Cade spat. "John Dalton, railroad supervisor. He worked for Harrison, took bribes, helped cover up murders. When the company started liquidating, I knew there might be evidence hidden somewhere. I've been searching for years, buying up old railroad property, trying to find it before anyone else did. So that was it. The Daltons weren't just thieves, They were protecting their father's legacy, trying to bury evidence that would prove he was a criminal. Your father made his choices, Ben said. You don't have to make the same ones. Ride away now. Leave the territory. We won't come after you. And let everyone know my father was a murderer. Let his name be dragged through the mud. Cade's hand moved toward his gun. I'd rather die. That can be arranged, a new voice called out. Everyone turned. Riding up the street were 10 men in the uniform of federal marshals, led by a granite-faced man with a silver badge. Behind them rode more. 20-30 men, a full posse. I'm Marshal Davis from Santa Fe, the leader announced. Got a telegraph message 3 hours ago about evidence of federal crimes. Looks like we arrived just in time. Ben looked at Silas, confused. They'd only escaped the canyon at dawn. How had someone sent a telegraph hours ago? Then Silas understood. He looked at Sarah, who was trying not to smile. You sent it yesterday, didn't you? Before we even left for the canyon, I had a feeling things might get complicated, she admitted. So I sent a message saying we'd found evidence of a 20-year-old railroad murder case and might need assistance. The marshal must have ridden through the night. Marshal Davis dismounted, his eyes taking in the armed townspeople, the burned telegraph office, the Dalton brothers. Someone want to explain what's happening here? Ben stepped forward. Got a long story for you, Marshal. Evidence of murder, fraud, corruption going back 20 years. And these men tried to destroy it, he gestured to the Daltons. They're wanted in Arizona for murder, and they just burned federal property and threatened U.S. citizens. The marshal's expression hardened. Dalton brothers, you're under arrest. Surrender your weapons. For a moment, Silas thought Cade might actually draw. The man's hand trembled near his gun, his face a mask of rage and desperation. But Rance grabbed his brother's arm, whispered something urgent. Slowly, Cade raised his hands. This isn't over, he said to Silas. That evidence, people will bury it again. They always do. Not this time, Silas said quietly. This time the truth comes out. For Thomas Whitmore, for all the people who died because of your father's greed. As the marshals took the Daltons into custody, as the sun climbed higher and the adrenaline began to fade, Silas felt exhaustion settling into his bones. He'd been awake for over 30 hours, had been shot at, had climbed through caves and ridden hard and faced down killers, but he'd stood his ground. He hadn't run. Sarah came to stand beside him, and he was acutely aware of her presence. The strength she'd shown, the courage, the quick thinking that had probably saved all their lives. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For believing this mattered. For helping an old fool chase a dead man's truth, she smiled. You're not a fool, Silas, and you're not old, just experienced. She paused. What happens now? Now, Ben said, joining them, we give our statements to the marshal. We hand over the evidence. And then Silas and I are going to ride to Santa Fe to find Margaret Whitmore and tell her the truth about her husband. Silas nodded, his hand touching the envelope in his pocket. The letters Thomas had written, the wedding ring he'd preserved. 20 years late, but Margaret would finally know that her husband had loved her, had died protecting his principles, had never stopped thinking of her. It wasn't enough to make up for the years of pain and shame she'd endured. But it was something. It was truth. And sometimes truth was all you could offer. Marshal Davis was thorough. He spent 2 days in Copper Falls taking statements, examining the evidence, and coordinating with other federal authorities. The portfolio Silas had found was authentic. Experts confirmed the handwriting, the paper stock, the age of the documents. Everything Thomas Whitmore had claimed was true. The names in the ledger sent shockwaves through the territory. 3 former railroad executives still living faced immediate arrest. A retired federal judge was implicated in accepting bribes. Even a current territorial legislator found his name in the records, connected to fraudulent land deals that had cost homesteaders their property. But before any of that could proceed, before the trials and the headlines and the political fallout, Silas had a promise to keep. He and Ben rode for Santa Fe on the 3rd day, carrying the sealed envelope and the wedding ring. Sarah had wanted to come, but someone needed to stay and help rebuild what the Daltons had damaged. She'd hugged Silas before he left, held him longer than was strictly necessary, and whispered, "Come back safe." He intended to. The ride to Santa Fe took 2 days through high desert and pine forests. They talked little, both men lost in their own thoughts. Silas kept touching the envelope in his saddlebag, feeling the weight of the words Thomas Whitmore had written to a wife he could never reach. Santa Fe sprawled across the landscape, adobe buildings glowing golden in the afternoon sun. The church directory had listed Margaret Whitmore's last known address on Canyon Road. Finding it took another hour of asking directions and following narrow streets. The house was small but well kept, with bright blue trim around the windows and a garden full of herbs and flowers. An older woman was kneeling among the plants, her grey hair pulled back in a simple bun. She looked up as they approached, wariness in her eyes. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Silas dismounted, his hat in his hands. Up close, he could see she was probably in her 70s, her face lined with years of sun and sorrow. But her eyes were sharp, intelligent, still full of life, despite the hardship she must have endured. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore. The wariness deepened. "I haven't used that name in years. Most folks know me as Margaret Sullivan, my maiden name. What's this about?" "My name is Silas Merrick. This is Sheriff Ben Harlow from Copper Falls. We have information about your husband." "About Thomas." Her face went pale. She stood slowly, dirt falling from her gardening gloves. "Thomas has been dead for 20 years, or disappeared, which amounts to the same thing. Why are you bringing him up now?" "Because he didn't run away," Silas said gently. "And he didn't steal anything. He was a hero, Mrs. Whitmore, and he never stopped loving you." She swayed slightly, and Ben moved forward to steady her. "Perhaps we should go inside," he suggested. Margaret led them into a tidy parlor filled with simple furniture and books. She sat heavily in a rocking chair, her hands trembling. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me everything." Silas did. He told her about buying the boxcar, finding the diary, discovering the cache in the canyon. He told her about Thomas witnessing murder, fleeing to protect the evidence, living in hiding for 6 years while consumption slowly killed him. He told her about the letter dated 1875, written by a dying man who'd sacrificed everything for his principles. As he spoke, tears rolled down Margaret's weathered cheeks. She didn't sob or wail. The grief was too deep, too old for that. She just wept silently, decades of questions finally finding answers. "He didn't abandon me," she whispered. "All these years, people saying he was a thief, a coward, and he was protecting me." "Protecting everyone?" "Yes, ma'am." Silas pulled out the envelope. "He wrote you letters over the 6 years he was in hiding. He couldn't send them, but he kept them, hoping someday you'd read them." Margaret took the envelope with shaking hands. The wax seal, impressed with Thomas's initials, was still intact. She broke it carefully, reverently, and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. The first letter was dated August 1869, just weeks after Thomas had disappeared. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then I am gone. But you know the truth. I did not leave you by choice. I left to keep you safe from men who would have killed you to silence me. Every day away from you is agony. I see your face in every sunset, hear your voice in every birdsong. Please forgive me for the pain my absence causes. Know that I love you more than life itself. Your devoted husband, Thomas." Margaret read in silence, turning page after page. Letters chronicling lonely years, expressing love and regret, describing the tuberculosis that was slowly killing him, talking about memories of their time together. The last letter was dated March 1875, the handwriting shaky and weak. "My darling, I am dying. The doctor says I have perhaps a week, perhaps less. I wanted my last thoughts to be of you, of your smile on our wedding day, of the way you looked in morning light, making coffee in our little kitchen, of your laugh, your kindness, your strength. I failed you in so many ways, but I never stopped loving you. I never will, even beyond death. Wait for me, my love. We will be together again. Forever yours, Thomas." When she finished reading, Margaret clutched the letters to her chest. "He loved me. Until the very end, he loved me. There's something else." Silas pulled out the wedding ring, held it up so the gold caught the light. He kept this with him. Hid it with the evidence, so it wouldn't be lost. Margaret took the ring with trembling fingers, read the inscription she'd written 57 years ago. She slipped it onto her right hand. Her left still wore the wedding band she'd never removed. Now she had both rings, husband and wife, reunited in gold, if not in flesh. "Thank you," she said, looking up at Silas with eyes that held profound gratitude and equally profound sorrow. "Thank you for bringing him back to me." They stayed in Santa Fe for 3 more days. Margaret wanted to know everything, every detail of Thomas's diary, every word of his final letter to whoever found the evidence, every aspect of how Silas had discovered the truth. She listened with fierce attention, asking questions, piecing together the final years of her husband's life. On the 2nd day, she asked to see the diary itself. Marshal Davis had it as evidence, but he agreed to let her read it under supervision. Silas accompanied her to the Federal Building, watched as she turned the pages with gentle reverence, reading her husband's words. When she reached the entries where Thomas wrote about her, about missing her smile, about the guilt of causing her pain, about the love that sustained him through years of hiding, she wept openly. Silas sat beside her, offering silent support, understanding that some grief was too deep for words. "He was always so honest," Margaret said when she could speak again, "even as a young man before we married. He couldn't lie, couldn't cheat, couldn't look away from wrongdoing. I loved that about him, but I also knew it would cost him someday." She touched the diary's cover. "I just never imagined the price would be so high." "He saved lives," Silas said. "The evidence he preserved is putting corrupt men in prison. It's forcing the railroad to improve safety standards. His sacrifice meant something, I know, and I'm proud of him. But oh, how I wish he'd been less heroic and more alive." She smiled sadly. "Selfish of me, I suppose. Not selfish, human." On the 3rd day, Margaret asked Silas about himself, about his life, his regrets, what had led him to buy a rusted boxcar with his last few dollars. He found himself telling her things he'd never told anyone, about Catherine and James, about the years of drifting, about feeling like he'd wasted his life on nothing that mattered. "But you mattered to me," Margaret said firmly. "You gave me back my husband's honor. You risked your life to bring me the truth. How is that not mattering? It's one thing. One good thing in a lifetime of one good thing can outweigh 1,000 mistakes," she interrupted. "Thomas made mistakes too. He was stubborn. He could be proud, and he made a choice that kept us apart for the rest of our lives. But he also stood for something. He also tried to do right. That's what I remember. That's what matters." Silas felt something shift inside him, some old weight loosening. "I have a son. Haven't seen him in over 20 years. Don't even know if he's alive, then find out. Write to him. Even if he doesn't respond, at least you'll have tried." Margaret took his hand. "Don't wait until you're dying to say the things that matter. Thomas would tell you the same thing." That evening, sitting in his hotel room, Silas pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster, years of regret and hope spilling onto the page. "Dear James, you probably don't remember me well. You were 8 years old when I left, and I expect you spent the past 21 years thinking I was a coward who abandoned his family. You'd be right, I won't make excuses. I was young, scared, unable to settle down the way your mother needed. I thought leaving would be better for you both than staying and being miserable. I was wrong. I recently helped solve a mystery about a man who spent 6 years in hiding, unable to go home to his wife, dying alone with nothing but regrets and letters he could never send. It made me think about the letters I never sent you, the apologies I never made. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you. Wondered what kind of man you became. Hoped you were happy. If you want to write back, I'll be in Copper Falls, New Mexico territory. If you don't, I understand. Your father, Silas Merrick." He posted the letter the next morning, not knowing if it would ever reach James, not knowing if his son would care. But Margaret was right. Trying mattered, even if it failed. They said goodbye to Margaret on their last day in Santa Fe. She stood in her garden, both rings on her hands, Thomas's letters tucked safely in her house. She looked older than when they'd arrived, the weight of old grief mixed with new understanding. "Will you come back and visit?" she asked. "I'd like to hear how things turn out for you." "I will," Silas promised. And he meant it. Margaret Whitmore had become a friend, someone who understood loss and resilience, someone who'd survived 20 years of shame and uncertainty with grace intact. As they rode out of Santa Fe, Ben glanced at Silas. "Feel like you did something worthwhile?" Silas thought about Margaret's tears, about Thomas's letters finally reaching their intended reader, about justice slowly grinding forward. "I do. For the first time in a long while, I really do." "Good, because Sarah's waiting for you back in Copper Falls, and I'm pretty sure she expects you to stay around this time." Silas smiled, feeling something warm kindle in his chest. Hope, maybe, or possibility. That might just happen. They rode toward home through afternoon sunshine. Two men who'd stood for something that mattered, carrying the satisfaction of promises kept and truth revealed. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation in Copper Falls. The town had settled back into its rhythm, though everything felt different now, charged with the energy of change and possibility. The trials were ongoing. Federal prosecutors had moved quickly, and every week brought news of another conviction. Harrison's son, who'd inherited his father's railroad position, resigned in disgrace when his own involvement in recent corruption came to light. The railroad company itself faced massive fines and federal oversight, forced to compensate families of workers killed due to negligence. Thomas Whitmore's name was cleared officially, his widow receiving a formal apology and a substantial settlement from the railroad. Margaret had written to Silas, telling him she planned to use the money to establish a scholarship fund for children of railroad workers. Thomas would have liked that, she'd written. Turning wrong into something good. The payroll money from the cash had been recovered by federal marshals and distributed to the families of the workers it had been meant to pay 20 years earlier. Most were dead now, but their children and grandchildren received what was owed. Small fortunes to some, closure to all. As for Silas, he'd used his portion of the reward money. The government had been generous to those who'd brought the evidence forward to buy a small plot of land just outside Copper Falls. Nothing fancy, just 20 acres with a good well and enough grazing for a few horses, and room for a house, which he was building with his own hands, taking his time, doing it right. Rufus grazed contentedly in the pasture, his coat glossy from good feed and regular care. The donkey had earned his retirement, and Silas made sure he had everything he needed. Sarah helped with the building when she could spare time from the store. She had opinions about where the windows should go, how large the kitchen should be, whether the porch should face east or south. Silas listened, mostly agreed, and found he enjoyed the partnership. Enjoyed having someone to plan with, to build something alongside. They hadn't talked about the future explicitly, but it was there between them, the possibility of something more than friendship, more than neighborly cooperation. For now, working side by side was enough. But Silas suspected that would change given time. Ben Harlow had been promoted. With the corruption cases bringing territorial and federal attention, the governor had appointed him as a territorial marshal, responsible for a larger district. He'd offered Silas a deputy position, but Silas had declined. His fighting days were over. He'd stood his ground when it mattered, but now he wanted peace, wanted to build instead of pursue. He still lived in the boxcar while his house was being built. But now it felt different. Not a desperate refuge, but a temporary home, a reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd come. He'd cleaned it up, patched the walls, made it comfortable, and he'd mounted a small plaque on the exterior in memory of Thomas Whitmore, who stood for truth. People sometimes came to see it, to hear the story. Silas would tell them about the diary, the letters, the evidence that had brought down corrupt men. He'd tell them about Margaret, still living in Santa Fe, who'd finally learned her husband was a hero. And he'd tell them that sometimes what looks worthless, a rusted boxcar, a drifter with nothing to his name, turns out to hold something precious. The letter from James arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after Silas had sent his own. His hands shook as he opened it, afraid of what it might say. "Dear Father," it began, and Silas had to stop, overwhelmed by that single word, Father. Not Silas, not Sir, but Father. "I was surprised to receive your letter." Surprised but not angry. "Mother explained things to me as I got older. How young you both were, how scared, how the marriage wasn't working. She never spoke ill of you, though she had every right to. I'm married now, living in Colorado. I work as a school teacher. I have 2 children, your grandchildren, though that might feel strange to say. David is 5, Margaret is 3. I named her after my wife's mother, but perhaps it was meant to honor the woman in your story as well. I can't say I forgive you, not yet. 21 years is a long time, and the hurt doesn't go away with one letter. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to meet, to talk, to see if we can build something new from what's broken. If you're sincere about this, about staying in one place and being present, then come to Denver this fall. We'll introduce you to your grandchildren. We'll talk. We'll see what's possible. Your son, James Merrick." Silas read the letter 3 times, then sat in the doorway of the boxcar and cried, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place he'd kept locked for decades. Rufus came over, nuzzled his shoulder in concern, and Silas hugged the donkey's neck, grateful for the comfort. He would go to Denver in the fall. He would meet his son, his grandchildren. He would try to build something from the wreckage of his past. It might fail. James might decide forgiveness was impossible. But Silas would try, would show up, would be present in a way he'd never been before, because Thomas Whitmore's story had taught him something crucial. It's never too late to do the right thing. Never too late to stand for truth, to fight for what matters, to reach out to those you've wronged and ask for another chance. That evening, as the sun set over the New Mexico territory, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Silas stood with Sarah on the partially completed porch of his new house. They watched the light fade, comfortable in silence. "Going to be a good house," Sarah said finally. "It is. Thanks to your help. You did most of the work yourself, but you made it better. Made it feel like a home instead of just a building." He paused, gathering courage. "I'm going to Denver in the fall, to see my son." Sarah turned to him, smiled. "That's good." "That's right. Would you—" He stopped, started again. "Would you want to come with me? Not to meet James, not yet, but just to travel together. See some country. I'd value the company." She was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she took his hand, her fingers warm and strong. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, Silas thought about the journey that had brought him here. A rusted boxcar, a dead man's diary, a truth buried for 20 years, all of it leading to this moment, this place, this chance at redemption. People had laughed when he bought that train car, called him a fool. But he'd found something more valuable than gold inside it. He'd found purpose, found courage, found a reason to stop running and start building, and now, standing on the porch of a house he was constructing with his own hands, with a woman he cared for beside him, and a future with his son on the horizon. Silas understood what Thomas Whitmore had known all along. Some things are worth more than safety, more than comfort, more than hiding from risk. Honor is worth fighting for. Truth is worth protecting. And love, whether for a spouse, a child, or the principles you live by, is worth any sacrifice. The world had seen only what he'd lost, but they'd missed what he'd been willing to fight for, and in the end, that made all the difference.